It's a real pleasure to be here and listening to everybody that's come on before. They've sort of done half my job for me. So I want to really start by asking, so we've heard the stories, we've mentioned the workplace, and if you don't think that menopause is going to have an impact on the workplace, I ask you to think again, because it jolly well will. The stories you've heard here already have already depicted case studies about certain women, and I've got some to go through with you myself. And it's the sad part that it's ignorance that's causing this lack of information, that's causing this discord in the workplace, that is not allowing things to happen as a natural flow, because we're now talking about menopause. So let's reflect again on some of the information you've already received. You know about the number of women that it's affected in the UK today, and I'm just going to talk through some case studies because this is not a minority issue. We get very fixated on minority issues, but we've got to care for this and that area of society and the workplace. This is not a minority issue, so why aren't we doing something more about it? Because women don't shout enough about it and ask for help and support. Here is a very common misunderstanding. A client of mine, an employee, she thinks, and she only thinks, that she's going through menopause. She's unsure, am I the right age? When does it start? When does it finish? And what goes on in the middle? She's taken additional time off work. She's probably lied about this short-term time off work because she doesn't know how to discuss it with her manager. This is affecting her work. She knows it. Her manager knows it. Her manager has an off-the-record conversation with her. But what does she say? She says, if you can't do your job properly, there are plenty more who can. This is not an uncommon conversation. Her manager was female, probably going through menopause herself, and either she didn't want to recognise that fact, or she wasn't having symptoms and thought, well, you know, suck it up, get on with it, I've managed to do it. So there's plenty of people queuing up to do your job if you don't want to do it. And the irony of this is that this woman was working for a charitable organisation that supports health and well-being in the workplace for a particular band of people. I just think that's hysterical. I'm glad Diane mentioned West Midlands Police, because I think I actually instigated all the work that started there. And I'm very proud of what they've done and have continued to do since then. We had a great time up there. And I'm going to talk about a police officer now. This is a common misdiagnosis, as Kathy alluded to as well. Senior police officer, already signed off for 3 months due to stress and anxiety. She came along and attended one of our workshops, and she had a light bulb moment. She said, it's menopause. I don't have to have all this time off work. I don't have to take these antidepressants. There is another pathway open to me, and I can take it. So she started on looking at ways to coming back to work much more quickly than she had done. Here's another common misunderstanding. This woman was referred to me, and we had a very long conversation. A nurse, been working for 15 years in a major London hospital. She started to have a few off days. In fact, she got quite aggressive, had a row with her manager and other staff, not with the patients, I'm pleased to say, but just with the other staff. And she was reprimanded, put on report, and told to take 2 weeks off work so that she could get herself together. She referred to her line manager as Hitler. I know some other people in that particular hospital, and the line manager is not like that at all. But women's perception changes when these hormones are all going nuts, and they think that people are ganging up on them. And that's what was happening to this particular lady. She spoke to her union. As far as she was concerned, the union were a total waste of space. I now know who that union is, and I'm going to be talking to them about the information, the lack of information, they're not being able to support their members in hospitals. And also, she also said that she couldn't speak to her GP, and as Kathy has told us, GPs are brilliant at what they do, but they're generalists, and so often they don't want to get involved with menopause. It's just too hard. And yet most of the women coming through the door of the surgeries are going through menopause. And it's a very poor state of affairs, and I'm glad that the BMS is doing something about it and getting more engaged with GPs, because women just need it. But going back to this nurse, she's now got that information on her employment worksheet for the next 12 months. Why? That was so totally unnecessary. There was a perfectly good reason why all this happened. If anybody had had just a little bit of information to talk to her in a different, better way, they would have understood it better, and she wouldn't have been on report. She wouldn't be going through disciplinary procedures. But I went through 3 divorces. We've heard quite a few stories here this evening. My family business, which was already said in the introduction. Because I was having such a terrible time, I resigned. I didn't have a clue what was going on. I had no idea about this thing called perimenopause. Just didn't know why all these things were happening to me and why I felt like this. My husband, literally, we almost divorced. We had a terrible, terrible, terrible time. And I just didn't know where it was going to end until one day we were at my daughter's prize giving, all suited and booted and pretending to be the perfect family. And I broke down in tears. The kids were singing a song to Queen's We Are the Champions, and they were singing We Are the Leavers. And I had tears streaming down my face. And of course, all the other mums and dads thought it was because my youngest was now leaving the school she'd been at for the last 8 years. No, my life was falling apart. My life as I knew it. My husband, I hated my husband, he hated me, and I didn't like my kids either. I didn't know what was going on. I just thought I was going mad. But nobody was telling me. I was eventually diagnosed with depression, and it was years before I discovered there was such a thing as hormonal depression. So, you know, there's a big crossover there. And going through depression, I wanted to end my life. No woman should have to think that. No woman should have to be in a deep, dark place where she just thinks there's no room on the planet for her anymore. What's she doing here? So as a result of that, I thought to myself, nobody's telling women what they need to know. So I'm going to jolly well do it. I did a lot of research, and we now go out and talk to employers and do training with employers, and to give a better understanding about this thing called menopause. And it's just simple steps that need to be taken to help you to understand your workforce and help the women in your workforce to move on. The research. You've heard about the research already. But out of this, you know, you've got the TUC, Department of Education, Nottingham University, all sorts getting involved in the research. The Department of Education have even published a business case for doing something about menopause. So if they've published a paper saying, get some training in place, get some advice, get some support, do this, that and the other, because here's the difference to your bottom line. Excuse my voice, I'm just getting over a cold. We already know about the impact and challenges, the stress, anxiety and depression, and this is happening to women every day. And managers are saying to HR, I don't want to work with this woman anymore. I want her managed out. Now, we've heard that. I want her managed out. She's not going to be in my team anymore. What's happening there? It's just ignorance and lack of knowledge. And so we've got to have this support in place where everybody, we've got a menopause hub, people are more talking about it, they're getting information coming in. And I think it's just disastrous that it's taken us so long to do anything about it. As April said, I've been doing this at least for 10 years. I didn't have a clue what I was doing when I first started. I just went out and told my story to whoever would listen. And then gradually I learned more and more about what was going on. Of course, I'd been a working woman, so I knew the effect on me. And I could see that happening in the workplace. The women weren't putting their hands up and saying, excuse me, can you tell me about this? As Diane was saying, they would queue up afterwards and they'd stand right in front of you so that nobody else could see them because the tears were streaming down their face because they had nobody else to talk to and they didn't know what to do. We've got to do something more about that. And we're in a slightly different situation at this end of the employment chain. We all know how much money the big organisations are throwing at engaging more women to get them up to the C-suite. But what's the long-term view? What are the challenges? I bet nobody's thought about menopause in this mix. Let's get more women on boards. But this was a situation, this was a real company, 189 senior partners and only 13% of women. They're starting to go through menopause and they're considering resigning because they haven't been given any information or support and or they haven't got enough information and support. They're leaving for work-life balance. I left for work-life balance. I thought that's the answer, it's work-life balance. Rubbish. There's always compromise. So we need to consider all these things. And here's the impact of that ignorance. The bottom line is hemorrhaging. Increased absenteeism costs, all the costs associated with all these crazy things going on. And most of all, morale and motivation is low. Think what would happen to those women if you started recognising menopause in the workplace. You'd have so many friends. They'd be going, great, I work for somebody who actually understands menopause. I don't have to pretend anymore. I don't have to go into the toilet and scream on my own. I can actually talk about it to my line manager who's a man. He gets it. And we've got to always bring men into the situation because, in my view, so many men are very perceptive. They can see the changes. They don't quite know what or why, but they can see something's going on. So if suddenly we allowed them to have this conversation, it would go a lot further, wouldn't it? Makes sense. Because if you don't do anything, you may end up with this situation. Why? Are you using the Equality Act properly? Is menopause covered? Are your staff aware of how to use it properly when they're seeking out professional advice from doctors? Are they getting the right reports back? Is it too mental health focused and not mentioning menopause at all? Because the parties don't know what's going on. It's awareness again and just raising that information. And I know people that have used the Act in relation to women's health, And I've asked them, what kind of report did you get back from the doctor? Oh, it was all about mental health and depression, and they were signed off for 3 months. No! It can be such a different pathway if we actually know what's at the bottom of all these issues causing women to go a bit crazy for a while. And once they know that they've got these issues, they can monitor it themselves and understand it better and do something about it. So are you menopause ready? Because it's a silent career killer. If you go back to the investment that the companies are making into improving the level of women on boards, reaching senior level, or just improving their general status, this is what women are saying. Menopause is a silent career killer. So what we need is damage limitation. We need to all sit around the table together and start discussing this. HR, OC Health, what really surprises me is when HR is absent from the room. I just don't get it. We get equality and diversity, we get OC Health, but HR seem to think it doesn't matter to them that they know about menopause. It so does. They are key to getting something done. So I've got a 3-point action plan for you. First of all, you need to work out who needs to know. Health champions in the workplace, line managers, OC Health, HR, whatever your particular needs are for yourself or for your workplace, you need to think about that. And you need to ask each other, ask professionals, ask us, ask anybody, well, what information do they need? What do we need to know to help us overcome these challenges? And it's very, very simple. And the most important thing for me is that you measure the results. You measure absenteeism, you measure advancement, you measure training, you measure a whole raft of things. But if anybody has had menopause training or menopause information support or anything like that, that they're on a pathway to understanding what's going on with their health, are you measuring it? Is there an improvement in absenteeism? That's the important part. Is there an improvement in productivity? That's important. These are some of the organisations that we've worked with who have decided it is important to do something about menopause. That they and funnily enough, you know, when we go into a workshop, the delegates are waiting outside and they're chatting away and all talking about menopause. And then during the event they say, how do we have this discussion with our staff, with our teams? So you've already started. You started a week ago when you said you were attending this event and you haven't stopped talking about it since, and we've been talking about it today. So it's small steps, financial benefits for all concerned, and you'll have a great place to work. Thank you very much.